Hi, I'm Tim Ganen. Welcome back to my blogs that I'm reading out. This one's called The Living Torah, The Path. I see fire rolling across the surface of the ocean, orange against the pale blue of the sky. The fire is knowledge, the knowledge is truth, and the truth is the Torah of Adonai. I believe that there is a direct relationship between God and the Bible and this world, even though it is difficult to express these relationships in ways easy for everyone to understand. For how can spiritual things be made clear to intellectual minds, and how can the materialistically inclined be made to see how the supernatural is as much a part of everyday life as the air that we breathe? Usually, such clarity of vision is reserved for those who have had a near-death experience or whose religious upbringing was of such good quality and balance as to reveal to them these hidden things. But knowledge can be a double-edged sword, a weapon that in the wrong hands can bring suffering and death instead of light and life. What is this knowledge then? Can I put it into simple terms? Imagine this, which is to say nothing. And from this nothing arises all things. How? Simply because even a nothing is really a kind of a something. And if the nothing that the universe came from was a something, then you can imagine that something as the spiritual realm. In other words, it's nothing because we don't perceive it, but if it is there, then that's the spiritual realm. Simple enough. But what sort of a realm can be considered spiritual, and what does this have to do with the Bible, in my opinion? For an analogy of the spiritual realm, think of a trail between two waves, the gap between two waves. This trail is of itself nothing, yet without it, the waves on either side could not exist. In other words, the trail, the physical actions, the physics, hold the waves up, and it's the gap that is part of that equation. The spiritual dimension serves the same purpose for our physical universe. Unseen, it has the necessary properties to act as a framework for the fabric of space and time as we perceive it, if there is time, because of course not all scientists believe that time exists. If it doesn't, and we all live in a single moment, what separates it? Perhaps something God has put in us to make our lives seem sequential and ordered. We don't know. Such as it is, it may not always be considered spiritual. As science theory advances to the borders of this once fabled land, if that ever happens, which I doubt. Think of psychology. Psychology is trying to examine why people's minds and emotions function in a certain way. If it turns out that emotions are actually a kind of the tip of the iceberg of our spirituality that reaches down deep into our unperceivable souls, that is not perceivable through science, but you can certainly sense it as a human being in certain moments of your life. So in this way, psychology is on the borders of the spiritual realm, but it doesn't know it, and it's trying to ascribe to these spiritual things, such as how we react to music and our feelings, and that all animals having also a spirit and a flesh that God has put in them, and He created all things. It's trying to assign a materialistic value to the spiritual part of ourselves, unsuccessfully, and so unsuccessfully that if you follow psychology now, it's actually talking a lot about Eastern meditation, about all sorts of hallucinogenic medication, that basically psychologists are becoming shamans because they, even though they might not acknowledge it, they have ventured into the spiritual realm, and they're going down the same path that other societies have gone down that don't want to acknowledge a single God, a single creator, that want to have themselves more in the equation or whatever. The fire that I spoke of at the beginning of this essay then represents the day when religion and science will truly and irrevocably overlap, and in the past civilizations that has been a bad thing, except for in ancient Israel, where the spiritual and the physical were meeting in the temple of God through the high priests in a certain way that God had set. The Bible is representative of the way of the future because it is the past, and it is in the shadows of the past that the shades of the future can be seen, which is what I've been talking about. If the psychologists bring in all this spirituality, paganism, and pantheism, and animism, and all that stuff, then that's something that's happened in the past, and the destination of that in the nations that have followed it is always destruction, usually through war or drought or something. What vortexes arise and consume those who, with open hearts and minds, study the ancient books of the Hebrews? And why, of all the religious books on earth, would the collection belonging to a small, once obscure Middle Eastern tribe hold such a central place? Perhaps all religious and philosophical texts act as a kind of a gateway to higher forms of thought, a place where the human soul can reach out to touch the divine. The difference is that the books of the Hebrews contained today in the Bible do this better. In fact, they do it perfectly. I would justify this explanation through my personal experience, and that of all those who have taken a path similar to mine. In other words, everyone who's fully put their trust in God. In the Old Testament, you can read about their lives, and through the ages who have become believers in Yeshua the Messiah, born again Christians who have had that direct experiences. You can read about those in the Brit Hadesha, the New Testament. It's an actual experience. This is not something that you go to church and you see a priest doing something and it's a ritual, it's a habit. This is something you experience in your day-to-day life, challenges you day to day. In short, if the ancient religious and philosophical works of this world are its true treasures, then the Bible is the living diamond amongst all its brilliant yet flawed peers. But you as an individual will have to try the Bible for yourself to discover this. And I'm not sure if I'd say the other spiritual books should be put on the same level, but they certainly are written by people who want to follow that pathway and answer that question of, is there a spiritual realm? Is there a God? Can I investigate? Can I interact with God? In the Bible, yes, you can, but be careful because God is a consuming fire. You must do so respectfully. Imagine a world formless and void, shrouded in darkness, unseen. It may take any form once revealed by light. In fact, if light were a thing to be placed in the eyes of those that were to see it, the seeing of it would ultimately determine the nature of this world. I'm not sure what I was talking about when I wrote that, but it sounds pretty interesting. All that is needed is the mechanisms to make this happen, and the force to govern the actions of these mechanisms. To simplify the picture of how this might be possible, we can imagine the force that governs the mechanism as thought and the mechanism as words. If the Bible represents the words that cause the universe to exist and function, then the thoughts behind it are those of God. When we interact with the world, therefore, we interact with the product of that mechanism, and when we interact with the Bible, we interact with the mechanism itself, or maybe a conduit of that mechanism as it records how God created the world, for example. This is a good thing, because the Bible has been especially designed to be interacted with. It is designed to bring life to those that understand it and apply its teachings. All that is needed for this exercise is a basic command of the language you encounter the Bible in, and respect for the dignity of the people of the Bible that the Bible describes. Remembering, of course, the Bible is the living history of the Jewish people, and a willingness to learn. No intermediaries are necessary, for God hears those that call upon His name, the Bible tells us. If you need help understanding and applying the Bible, God will send teachers to you through any part of this world and any medium with which you interact. What then is God's name? God's name is salvation, Yeshua, for He will save you if you ask Him to. The other thing to consider in all of this is how much a part of God is the Bible. After all, the thoughts of God have traveled a long way to be made into words, brought carefully through the barrel of time and delivered to you in your language to be read at your convenience, if you have the blessing of the convenience to read the Bible. How will you trust that the words of the Bible are true to the original meaning and context? I think the best test for this is the kind of difference the application that the biblical principles can be made to a life, a community, and even a nation. In other words, if you follow the Bible as much as you can in the way it's supposed to be followed, it will be a blessing to you or your nations. So, for example, nation states built around the biblical principles are, after all, a lot better off than those that are not. Individuals that trust in the Bible have peace, even if their lives are not perfect. So the Bible will, in the very least, enhance your quality of life. Conclusions. To summarize, I will construct a kind of a formula. Physical objects and their properties equal the sum of biblical verses, which equal the expression of God's thoughts, which equal the nature of God's intent. The relationship between all these things, considering one came from the other, means that in the final reality there is nothing but the thing from which all things came. However, the fact that all things are in content composed of the thing that made them need not mean they need to be considered as the original thing itself. That's very important. We're not God. God made us. And you can say, well, if there was nothing else and God made everything, he made it out of himself. That's not how things work with God. If God makes something and he separates it from himself, then it's separated. All right? All things are made except God. All things can be seen, but their maker is hidden. When we acknowledge the maker of all things, we acknowledge the sacred nature of ourselves, because as an issue of the divine, we hold within us a part of that. That's our soul. The Word of God, as his thoughts, feelings, and rulings, hold a special place in this universe, not only as a description of things and their function, but also as their destiny. The Bible is the beginning and the end of this world, then. That is, it describes the beginning and the end of this world. Not just by description, but by function, because it's God's word. Therefore, when it comes to pass, it acts in a way as a kind of the speech of God. He's telling us before it happens, and in this way, the Bible is a very, very powerful object if you look at it from that perspective. There's also a representation of God's mind. If God were to appear, the Bible would describe how this would happen, and in a way, the Bible equates to this kind of an apparition for most of us. That is to say, we meet God in the form of the Bible. That's how we learn about him and understand him. And this is what he's given to us. This is a miracle he's given to us in this day and age, which is more than most people have had throughout the history of the earth. So we should be appreciative of that. So, go and encounter the Bible and be blessed.